heart of EU decision-making, mediating between increasingly antagonistic and anti-EU member states. One of the most testing periods for the EU in its recent history. I'm joined by European Council President Herman Van Rompuy on the Global Conversation. Many thanks for joining us. You're here in Germany to receive the Charlemagne Prize. It's a prestigious award which celebrates those who've strived for European unity. It's a bit ironic, is it not, that you're receiving it at this moment when Europe seems to be tearing itself apart. As one of the three heads of the EU, what portion of blame do you accept for the situation we're seeing now?
In the European Union itself, things are going well as far as peace is concerned. We have problems at our borders, that's something else, but not in the European Union itself. But still, we are the biggest peace project in human history. So now, do I receive now the Charlemagne Prize in these, again, turbulent periods of Euro hostility, Euro negativism, Euro skepticism? But let us not forget that even after the European elections, 70% of the parliamentarians will be parliamentarians belonging to political parties in favor of the European project.
Which means that some
70%.
Yes, but up to 25% are now against it. That's never happened in the history of the EU
No, but
before.
you have to keep the sense of proportion, and still there is an overwhelming majority of people in favor, parliamentarians in favor of the European project. You are right that the minority of anti-Europeans was never as big as today. But it's not a homogeneous group. There's people coming from the left, the extreme left, the right, and the extreme right.
Given the momentum that they've had over recent years, are you not concerned that they are going to form a cohesive group? Because we've seen that the far-right leader, Marine Le Pen, is trying to form a group in the parliament.
Yeah, but not with the left. They are trying to find a group with like-minded. But you had already populism long before the financial crisis, long before the eurozone crisis. I give you an example. You mentioned Madame Le Pen. Her father, 10 years ago, he was the second in the presidential elections just after the incumbent President Chirac. So that was nothing to do with Europe at that time. That had nothing to do with the eurozone crisis. But it was at that time already 19% of the French electorate voting for the extreme right.
So then we can say
populism is part of political life. Of course, this is increased, enhanced by the eurozone crisis and by the economic crisis. So I'm not underestimating it, I'm putting it in the right framework.
Do you accept that you might have made mistakes during your tenure?
Everybody who takes responsibility makes mistakes, and surely there were mistakes made at the level of the Union and at the level of the member states. But
at the level of the European Council, what would you say you could have done different?
Yeah, I will not give the enumeration of my mistakes. Our enemies are doing this in our place.
Okay, but the main issue you wish...
Let's say in general, we have to agree with 18 in the eurozone or 28 in the Union, and often we acted a little bit too late. We did, as some said, at some moments, too little and too late. But what is the result? The result is that we took away the existential threat to the euro and to the eurozone.
Do you think the existential threat to the euro has gone when you've got leaders like, again, Marine Le Pen, who want to get rid of the euro?
The financial markets, that was the biggest threat. The financial markets were convinced, let's say, 1.5 years ago, that the euro would collapse. The only discussion was on the moment that it would collapse. But that it would collapse, that was for sure. That was for sure. So this is over. This debate in the international media, international financial markets is completely over. Even in countries as France, even in countries as Greece, there is a strong majority of the people who want to belong to the Union and to the euro.
We've asked our internet audience to send us in questions for this interview. We received a question from someone who goes by the name of Super James Pond, who asks, does President Herman Van Rompuy understand that the people of the EU are fed up with what the EU stands for and the countries the EU has destroyed?
I don't underestimate what happened during the European elections and also during national elections with strong messages regarding Europe. But the mistake you may not make is the people as if everybody is thinking the same. That's not true at all. That's not true at all. When you go further and ask more questions, people, and then with a huge majority, an overwhelming majority, want to stay in the Union and want to stay in the eurozone. Almost nobody wants to go back to the situation before 1958. Nobody.
Well, they voted for parties that want to take their countries out of the Union,
yeah,
so are you dismissing it as a protest vote?
No, but they are not the majority of the people. Don't confuse parties, some small parties, some bigger parties, with the majority of the population.
How can the Parliament, how can the EU institutions work with this group, which is opposed to the EU itself? We saw that Nigel Farage, the leader of UKIP, said that if anything, this election marks an end to the inevitability of further integration.
UKIP and other parties are not the majority in the Parliament, not at all. So the EU institutions, the European Parliament, can function, whatever he may think. But then doesn't there seem to be a discrepancy in what you're saying? Because on the one hand you're saying, OK, we're going to listen to these, but then on the other hand you're saying, well, it's going to be business as usual. No, you have to listen to the message of the voters. The message of the voters is that there is a disenchantment with functioning of EU institutions. There is a malaise because Europe is also related to unemployment, to the crisis, and so on. And we have to give answers to this in terms of a policy that is promoting economic growth, creating jobs again, and we are on the right track. That is the message I got. The message of extremists, this is not helpful at all.
Would you say that Nigel Farage is an extremist?
Yeah,
given
when your proposal is to leave the European Union, is that not extremism?
Is more integration that's inevitable then?
More integration in the eurozone is inevitable because if we have a common currency, we need much more common policies. I am not saying this because I am a European fundamentalist at all. That is the logical consequence of the choice we made many years ago in the Treaty of Maastricht and with the launching of the euro. When we have a common currency, you need much more common policies. The will of the people is to have jobs and to have good living standards. And without sustainable economic and monetary union and without a more integrated eurozone, we can't just have that prosperity and that employment.
Precisely, you mentioned jobs. When you came into office, you said decreasing unemployment, battling unemployment was your priority. We're now seeing that there are about 25 million unemployed across the EU 28. Do you accept that there's been a major failure here?
There was a problem of structural unemployment in Europe and especially in the eurozone long before the crisis. We didn't tackle that problem at that time.
So there was a failure there. You accept the EU
was a failure
failed?
At that time already. It was a failure, and I was not discussing the responsibilities. Let's say that was a collective responsibility, a joint responsibility from the countries, the nation states, and from the EU institutions at that time. Now we had this crisis of the euro and the eurozone. Of course, this was a game changer. When I took office, I could never have foreseen that we will be a few months later in a major crisis, the biggest crisis since the beginning of the European Union. And we overcame this crisis with a lot of work at the level of the member states and at the level of the Union.
You can say you've overcome the crisis?
We overcome the existential threat to the eurozone. That's clear. the price to pay for this
the
was
social
a high
price to say, when you look at Greek unemployment, the so-called lost generation, we've overcome the crisis?
No. You may not make a caricature of what I'm saying. I have said that we overcame the existential threat to the euro. I never said that we overcame already the job crisis and the economic crisis. But here also, let's keep in mind the recent developments. 2013, even in Greece, was a year for the very first time of positive economic growth. Are we where we have to be? No, not at all. 2015, next year, will be even a better year. On average, we will have in the European Union an economic growth of 2%.
Which isn't enough to really make a difference.
It is slow, but it is much better than a few years ago. And so here, gradually, we're coming out of the crisis. We have to do more. We have to do more on growth and on jobs. Perspectives are better. And that's why we are reflecting now in the European Council, and I'm sure that the same will happen in the new European Commission and in the new Parliament, on what are the biggest priorities and challenges for the years ahead. And of course, the biggest challenge is, to put it in a very simple way, growth and jobs.
We've got a lot to talk about. I'd like to bring in a question from Pietro De Matteis. It comes back to the European elections, and he says, will President Herman Van Rompuy support the choice made by Europeans for the next European Commission president? Here he's obviously talking about Jean-Claude Juncker, who is the leader of the centre-right group in the Parliament.
Mm-hmm. I received a mission from the European Council to a mission fully in line with the European treaties. And we have to respect the treaties.
The treaties are vague, so should Jean-Claude Juncker... You've spoken about this, this before.
We have to respect the treaties. As national parliamentarians have to respect their constitution. We have to respect the treaties. So what says the treaties? The treaty says that it is the European Council who make a proposal for a candidate president of the European Commission. For making this proposal, we need a qualified majority in the European Council. And this candidate put forward by the Council needs a majority of 370 votes, 75 votes in the European Parliament. We are respecting this procedure.
But you have talked about this before. You've said that you didn't really back the idea of the Spitzenkandidat.
And now we have an official mandate, an official mission. We are in a new situation, and so I will be very discreet the upcoming weeks, and I will say nothing that will complicate a situation which is already complicated.
From reading between the lines what you're saying, we can expect a clash between the European Council and the Parliament.
You read something under the lines, in the lines which is not written. I said it also in public before, and I repeat it now. I will do everything I can to avoid a clash of the institutions.
It will also be a problem if, again, Jean-Claude Juncker or possibly Martin Schulz, if he forms a majority, do not become the future presidents of the European Commission, because citizens voted for them. Citizens went out to vote, being given the impression that their vote counted. The election was under the slogan, "This time it's different." So they felt they were voting for those people. That's going to be a blow to democracy.
I don't agree with your evaluation and with your assessment, but again, I will make no comments, not even on your evaluation, but this can only make things more complicated.
OK, well, then we'll have to move on to some other issues then, because we're not going to move further on this, obviously. You've been very active in Ukraine, trying to resolve the situation there. It's another issue where unity is a big problem. The country is very divided. We have President Poroshenko, who has been recently elected. Do you think he has the ability to reunite the country?
There is a lot of instability in the country, because it is destabilized from outside. I think that the new elected president has got a strong mandate from the people, even if not in all the parts they could vote, because they were prevented to vote. But he has a strongland mandate, and it can be a turning point in the crisis. You see also some signs, too timid and not strong enough, of openings from the Russian side. On our side, and the European side, and I thought it is also the case for the newly elected president, we want a diplomatic, a negotiated solution for the crisis, not a military solution.
So would you be willing in that case, if everybody, namely Russia, were not to respect its commitments, would you be then willing to raise the bar of sanctions against Russia?
Our first aim is dialogue and negotiations. Sanctions are not a purpose in itself, not an aim in itself. It is let's say, a pressure to put pressure on others to look for a negotiated solution if there is not sufficient goodwill. We took sanctions already.
Would you be willing to raise those sanctions again? Is it yes or no?
No. I would just say what we already did. We said in the European Council that the Commission will go on with the preparations of additional sanctions, and if events need it, we can take them. We can take them. And everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. The scenario is ready, but the priority now is to give negotiations a chance. But if the destabilization continues, then we have to go to a further stage.
Your mandate is coming to a close now. It'll be ending in November. If you had to rate yourself between 1 and 10, as you were the first permanent European Council President.
I just received the Charlemagne Prize for my contribution to European integration. So I'm not judging myself. That's a little bit ridiculous. But I see that I received this prize. I'm very honored, but at the same time, I know what we did wrong, what we could have done better. I know also that we succeeded in stabilizing the eurozone and saving the euro. That's a collective work, and I'm proud of it.
We received a question from Facebook from someone called Daniel Junt, who says, what single most passion do you hold as a goal for the EU, and how do you seek on achieving that? Now, there's not much time left, but if you did have a goal, what would that be?
Well, the goal would be the most simple one, is that to take away this feeling that Europe is a threat. We have to work on different levels and on different avenues in different domains on creating this feeling that Europe is protecting you instead of getting this sentiment wrongly, but it exists, that Europe is a threat. And that's the main task for my successor, that Europe is considered not as a problem, but as a solution.
Will you stay in politics?
No, I will have 67 years old at the end of October. So it's time to leave. It's time to leave.
You've composed 2 haiku anthologies.
Yeah.
You describe it as something that helps you get through, I suppose, very difficult times. How much of a comfort is haiku poetry for you?
Yeah, but haiku poetry is part of this longing for a world of harmony. And haiku is also related to seasons, the internal cycle of life, which gives you a feeling of reassurance and of harmony. It is a hobby. It is more a hobby than a consolation.
Thank you very much for joining us on The Global Conversation.
Yep.
Thank you.